Chapter 8, Supporting Your Ideas. Before we get into the material for Chapter 8, just want to go over a couple of quick reminders. First, make sure that you are taking some sort of notes over this presentation, as these will become your study guide both for the test and for the comprehensive final at the end of the semester. Additionally, please make sure that you read through the chapter, and after reading through the chapter, you should be able to define and apply the key terms, and you should be able to answer the questions at the end. So with that, Chapter 8, Supporting Your Ideas. So when we're talking about supporting our ideas, what we're talking about is how are we going to reinforce our topic? How are we going to just not talk about it, but then become an authority figure on it? So some ways that we can support our topic is by providing examples, statistics, and testimony. These are the three largest examples of ways to support our speech topic, but these are not the only ways. So up first is an example. An example is only a specific case to help illustrate your idea. It's just there to help reinforce and support what you are talking about. So it takes it from being very abstract to more concrete. So we're going to go and take a look at three different types of examples. First, we're going to look at a brief example, kind of what that looks like. And then we're going to go ahead and take a look at a hypothetical and an extended. So up first is going to be the brief example. So a brief example is just a specific case referred to in passing to illustrate a point. It's very quick, and it just kind of allows us to quickly grab onto a concept or idea. So let's take a look at an example of a brief example where a specific case is referred to in passing to illustrate a point.
Many of us are familiar with prominent Chicanos and Chicanas, such as actress Jessica Alba, boxer Oscar de la Hoya, and guitarist Carlos Santana. But you may be less familiar with other Americans of Mexican origin who have made important contributions to U.S. society. Nancy Lopez played a crucial role in popularizing women's professional golf and won 48 tour championships. Dr. Ellen Ochoa is a former astronaut who logged more than 480 hours in space and invented several optical methods that greatly aid space exploration. Dr. Mario Molina won the 1995 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his research on the formation and decomposition of the ozone layer.
So our second type of example that we're going to take a look at is an extended example. The extended example is either a story, a narrative, an anecdote developed at length to illustrate a point. These take a little longer within our speech. So when we think about the brief example, it's kind of like just name dropping. And then the extended example is going to be more of like a story that we tell. So let's take a look at an example for an extended example.
In the history of the Olympic Games, there have been many shining stars. Among them was a European girl. With the lapse of time, her name has faded from our memory. Yet her unbending spirit shall never perish. It was she who highlighted the Olympic creed. Elite though she had been, she stumbled near the terminus and her leg was injured. Competitors passed her from behind in succession until finally only her weak and lonely figure remained on the track. Doctors came and offered to take her away, yet refused. With the only strength left in her, she managed to get up and shuffled feebly to the end point, with drops of blood along her trail. But cheers broke out. Though she failed in the race, the girl won the applause from people all over the world. It was she who elucidated the Olympic creed of participation. It was she who instilled perseverance in our mind.
Our final type of example is going to be that of a hypothetical example. So a lot of times we'll see this utilized in persuasive speaking, especially when it comes to calling for action from our audience. So if you don't do this, X is going to happen, and X is going to be that hypothetical example. So let's go ahead and take a look at what a hypothetical example might look like.
Imagine this. You're taking your psychology exam when you notice the student sitting next to you staring at your answers. You also notice his open notebook under his desk. You feel your cheeks redden as you become angry that he may get a high score by cheating while you've worked hard to earn your grade. And you feel helpless because you think telling the professor will do nothing. But now imagine that you attend a school with an honor system. At the beginning of each exam, you sign a statement that says you will not cheat and that you accept the responsibility to report cheating. After the professor hands out the exam, she leaves the room. In this case, you have the power and the duty to report cheaters rather than feel robbed by them. Such a system has worked elsewhere and can work at our school. Professor Donald McCabe, president of the Center for Academic Integrity, has surveyed more than 20,000 students at 70 colleges throughout the country, and his research shows that the level of cheating is significantly lower at schools with honor codes than at schools without them.
So when we're thinking about our examples, whether it's the brief, the extended, or the hypothetical, some things that we want to think about when preparing those and practicing those is we want to make sure that they're there to clarify our ideas and don't become distracting. Additionally, we want to make sure that they truly reinforce what we are trying to get across to our audience. We also want to make sure that they're personalized, that they are vivid and richly textured, and that we practice the delivery to enhance their impact on the presentation. So let's take a look at how we can use examples to enhance the ideas within a speech presentation.
Alan Marks is one of those people. A 58-year-old real estate developer and father of 3. He talked on his cell phone an hour a day for 23 years. 2 years ago, doctors found a golf ball-sized tumor in his brain. There's no question what caused it, he says. It was my cell phone. If Marks had known the dangers of prolonged cell phone use, he would have done things a lot differently. I wouldn't have held it to my head, he says. I would have used the headset, I would have used the speakerphone, and I would not have had the problems I had.
So another method for developing our speeches is providing some sort of statistical measures within. A lot of times we're going to see these in the persuasive series, but they still have some merit and use within the informative speech. So 3 things we're going to take a look at with statistical measures are just going to be some concepts that you were very familiar with through your math courses over the years, but that's just going to be mean, median, and mode. So as you do recall, mean is just the average value of a group of numbers. So we take the series of numbers, we add them up, and then we divide by the number of numbers that we added up to get our mean, or in other words, the average. So we might use this for doing some sort of survey to determine what is the average age of somebody who smokes, or what is the average age of somebody who stopped wearing their seatbelt, those kind of things. The next measure we can use is median, and that is the middle figure in a group once figures are ordered highest to lowest. This allows us to kind of eliminate some of those outliers that might cause the statistical data to be a little skewed, especially when we're just going for the mean or the average. So this allows us to get the true center of our numerical grouping. So if we were doing speed limit reduction outside of the high school, and we had a whole bunch of data collected, and we found that we had drivers who were only going 20 miles an hour, but that data was collected on a snowy day, we might want to use median versus the average. And then finally, we have mode, the number occurring most frequently in the group. This is another great way to kind of determine within our speech if we have specific information or ideas that we want to get across. So maybe, for instance, if we're talking about seatbelt safety, we might ask people, how many times a week do you forget to put on your seatbelt? And then we can take the number that we see occurring the most often there. So let's take a look at statistics and how they can be used within your particular speech.
According to the Urban Mobility Report from researchers at Texas A&M University, Americans collectively spend 4.2 billion hours stuck in traffic every year. All told, traffic congestion results in more than $87 billion worth of wasted fuel and lost productivity. Now that number breaks down to about $750 per traveler per year. Clearly, we are wasting far too much time and money on highway gridlock.
So when we're thinking about using statistics in our speech, the biggest thing we want to do is to make sure that our statistics are really going to support and reinforce what we're trying to get across. So a lot of times we use statistics to kind of quantify ideas. It's one thing for us to say that X is a problem, but if we can give merit to that by providing statistics, so whether that's the average number of accidents that happen, or the average speed limit, or how fast somebody was going, those kind of things, we can always use that measure to really reinforce our point or points that we're trying to get across. We want to make sure we use them sparingly. If you use too much statistics and data, you can bore your audience. We always want to identify the source and explain thoroughly. It's really important to make sure that we round off our statistic. We don't have to necessarily use the same rounding mechanism every single time, but if we were talking about people, for instance, and our number came out to be 2.75, it wouldn't make sense for us to say 2.75 people out of 10. So we might just round that up to 3 people out of 10, because what is 3/4 of a person? We just don't know. It doesn't make sense. So that's why it's important to make sure we round off. And then, of course, we can use visual aids as needed to kind of reinforce and support those particular data points. So let's take a look at how we can make statistics meaningful.
According to the Rainforest Action Network, rainforest is disappearing at an alarming rate. Within the next second, we will lose an area of rainforest equal to the size of 2 football fields. Within the next 15 minutes, an area equal to the size of this campus will be erased. By this time tomorrow, 214,000 acres, an area equivalent to the size of New York City, will be gone forever.
So the next idea that we're going to go ahead and talk about with supporting our speeches is the idea of testimony. And testimony is at its root, at its simplest form, is just quotations or paraphrases used to support the point or points you're trying to make. These are the words from the experts that are in the field or in practice of the topic that are really going to strike home what you're trying to get across to your audience. So there's a couple of different types of testimony that we use. The most common and well recognized is that of expert testimony. And expert testimony is simply testimony recognized from experts in the field. When we talk about experts in the field, it doesn't necessarily mean somebody who has a degree. So for instance, if we were doing an informative speech on building homes, a carpenter who has been in the in the field and been building houses for 30 years, we can consider them an expert. They might only have a high school diploma, but they're still an expert because they have spent 30 years doing that particular trade. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example of expert testimony.
Phony pharmaceuticals are so widespread that they have become big business. The FDA estimates that they will bring in close to $75 billion in revenue this year alone, up from $40 billion only a few years ago. Tom Kubik, head of the Pharmaceutical Security Institute, told USA Today in September 2010 that criminals can make more money in counterfeit drugs than they can in heroin.
The next type of testimony that we're going to go ahead and talk about is that of peer testimony. And that's testimony from ordinary people with firsthand experience and insight. Up next, a lot of times we use these in writing and in papers, and a lot of times you'll find these as a frequent portion of your informative or persuasive speeches, and that's a direct quote. And that is just simply testimony presented word for word. So you have found information, you have copied it from the document or copied it from the source and inserted it into your presentation or into your paper. We talked about at the beginning of the semester ethics and then ethics in public speaking. And one thing we have to be careful about when it comes to testimony is that we don't have any sort of out of context quotes. And out of context quotes are distorting statements by removing words or phrases around it. We see this a lot, especially during the campaign season for local and national offices. So an example of kind of an out of context quote is if politician A says, "I do not drink and drive," and the opponent takes out the word not, now all of a sudden politician A is quoted to say, "I drink and drive." The next type is paraphrasing, and this is where you restate the source's idea in your own words. So this is kind of your summary of what they said. It's still important to make sure that you have appropriate citations for this, as you are still referencing somebody else's work, but you're just restating the source's idea in your own words. So as we begin to think about tips and kind of wrapping up testimony, we're going to take a look at some tips for testimony. So we want to make sure that we quote and paraphrase accurately. We want to use qualified sources, so the sources that we feel are the best to support our particular speech, and they are meritable and they are ethically sound. We want to use unbiased sources. It's really important, especially when you're in the persuasive realm where you're trying to convince your audience to do one thing over another, that you have sources that aren't slanted one direction or the other. And then it's always important to make sure that we identify sources. So within our speech, both when we're speaking and if you're writing a paper, you're going to have some sort of citation. And when we cite our sources orally, we're always looking for the name of the document, the author, the sponsoring organization, and qualifications and date. The absolute most important thing with the citation is having authorship there. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at an example of an oral citation and what that might look like and sound like. Kenneth Chang, science reporter for the New York Times, reported in the paper's March 13, 2011 issue that the recent quake in Japan widened the country by 13 feet. It also tilted the Earth's axis and shortened the day by a couple millionths of a second. So as we begin to wrap up Chapter 8, Please make sure that you've gone through and taken notes over this presentation, as this will become your study guide for the test and for the comprehensive final at the end of the semester. Ensure you are reading the chapter and be able to define and apply key terms within the chapter in addition to answering the questions at the end.